Hello and welcome back to game number 15 of the series Masters of the Chessboard, where we are going through the games in the famous book by Richard Reti, Masters of the Chessboard, looking at each of the games one at a time and Reti's analysis of these games. We're still looking at the games of Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion. Steinitz has the black pieces, and his opponent, Samuel Rosenthal, has the white pieces. And this game is quite a famous game because it's one of the first games where we see Steinitz use a bishop pair and limit the opponent's knight's ability. So it's quite significant in that way. It's almost one of the starting games where we start to learn about different chess strategies. Now the game starts off with e4, e5, knight c3, going into what could potentially be the Vienna game. And Reti comments that this was analysed quite a lot by Viennese masters in the late 1700s. He says that the aim of e4, e5 should be to perhaps break in the centre with a move like f4 or d4. However, knight c3 does nothing to really allow for a d4 break, but it does prevent, after f4, black from playing d5 going into the Albin counter gambit. And he says that the Folkbier counter gambit is... I said Albin counter gambit. The Folkbier counter gambit. So after f4, d5 is the Folkbier counter gambit. And Reti comments that this is the best way to punish the King's Gambit. I'm not too sure it is considered that nowadays, but knight c3 adds another defender to this d5 square, so it means that f4 can't be met with d5. Now Steinitz continues with knight c6, and we see knight f3. Now, Reti comments that to play in the style of the Vienna game, f4 would need to be played. You can play it now, or you can potentially play bishop c4, d3, knight e2, and then f4. And one of the main ideas is to castle kingside, and you'll have this potential open f-file if you're to take with your rook on f1, or you could potentially have a pawn break here. And you might bring your queen to e1 and bring it across as well. So that's the Vienna game, but instead we see knight f3. Obviously blocking this f-pawn, stopping any f4 pushes. Now we see g6 going into the Steinitz defense. Now we see a few similarities with this fianchetto defense as we have in a previous game, and we'll see this style of defense again later on. So we see g6 and d4, e takes d4, and knight takes d4. Knight here may be an alternative option, attacking some of the weak and dark squares, but we see this. And now Steinitz fianchettos his bishop, bishop g7. We have bishop to e3, knight g to e7, bishop to c4, d6, castles, and castles. And we've reached the end of the opening. Interestingly, at least I found it interesting, the computer recommended queen to d2, because after castling, white can castle queenside, and we have essentially a very Sicilian-esque style structure. You can imagine if white had played f3, white would be in the setup for Yugoslav attack setup, which would see against the Dragon Sicilian. And actually, if this knight was on f6 and this pawn was here, we would have a Dragon Sicilian setup for black. This is the computer's preferred setup, which is quite... I thought it was interesting. But we don't see this. Instead, white castles kingside and black castles kingside. And so we finish the opening phase of the game. And here Reti offers a little bit of analysis. He says that white currently has a space advantage. White has a pawn on e4 and black has a pawn on d6. So white's a little bit better here because they have more central control, they have more of a space advantage. And also white's completely developed, except for perhaps bringing the queen up. Whereas black's light square bishop still needs to develop. So black's one move behind white in terms of development. Now here we see white play f4. And it seems like quite a logical move, controlling more of the centre, giving white potential options of e5 or f5. However, Reti comments that it's a bit premature. White has very good central control now, but this move wasn't prepared. It's not really going to last very long. And we'll see that Steinitz now plays knight a5, attacking this bishop, and this bishop hasn't really got anywhere good to go. If it goes to here, it will be taken. If it stays where it is, it'll be taken. And so once it retreats to d3, we see d5. And now we see why Steinitz played knight a5. It's to take away a defender of this d5 square. So he pushes d5, and we see e takes d5, and now knight takes d5. And we see how Steinitz has traded off white's central pawn with his own central pawn. So he's equalised in the opening. It's worth noting Steinitz wants to take, if given the choice, because it'd be trading off his pawn for white's central pawn. And pushing isn't really an option, because this would win a piece with c5, and if the knight moves, we have a fork. Quite a common little tactic that, although quite hard to see once you're in this position, but still, Rosenthal didn't fall for it. He took here, and we saw knight takes d5, knight takes d5, and queen takes d5. And now we see why this move was premature, because it's misplaced. It's undefended, it was not defended by any of the pawns. It's weakened this diagonal, and it's blocking in this dark square bishop. It would be better, actually, if this pawn was just on f2, completely unmoved. So we see with this queen takes d5, we have queen and bishop attacking the knight, so two attackers, one defender. So this knight is under attack. So we see c3, attempting to defend the knight. Rook to d8. Rook d8 is threatening c5, because after this knight moves, we'll have the queen and the rook attacking this bishop, with just the queen defending. So rook d8 is threatening to win a piece. And so we have queen c2. And now, after c5, we'd have bishop to e4, an in-between move. So now after the queen moves, this knight can move out the way. So we have queen to c2, preventing that tactic. And now we have knight to c4, hoping to try and pick up the bishop pair. And white complies, taking on c4, queen takes c4, queen f2. In this position, black was threatening bishop takes d4, because this pawn is pinned. So after bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, we then have rook takes d4. And if the pawn takes back, white will just lose their queen. So white plays queen f2. And here Reti offers quite a detailed analysis of this position again, and of the bishop positions with bishop pairs in general. He says that this game is probably one of the oldest games known where Steinitz was able to demonstrate the power of a bishop pair against a bishop and knight. So he says that bishops are long-range pieces, so they can move across the board very quickly, they can control a lot of squares, whereas knights are short-range pieces. So knights, to be effective, have to be supported on an outpost near the opponent's space, because that's the only way they're going to be able to attack the opponent's pieces. whereas bishops don't need that. Bishops need open files because that's how they can move around and attack. And you can see this bishop's quite powerful. If this bishop was on b2, it might be quite powerful as well. The bishop can move to here and control quite a big diagonal. So bishops prefer open positions where they're able to move around and control a lot of squares at once. And therefore, the method created by Steinitz is to try and, when you have a bishop pair versus a bishop and knight, to try and remove the potential outposts and support points for the opposing knight. So we'll see an option here might be c5 to remove this potential support point. Other potential support points are here and here, so you may want something like f6 or h6. And you may also want to consider trying to put your pawns on the same colour as this dark square bishop. Well, the opposing bishop, in this instance, it's dark square bishop. If it was a light square bishop, you may want them on light squares, because this would limit this bishop as well. And now if you can get your opponent's pawns stuck on dark squares, that's going to be even better. Now, it's logical, therefore, that if black's plan is to take away support points for the white knight, white's plan should be to try and create support points for this knight, and perhaps push their pawns to make sure these support points stay support points and can't be attacked or traded off by black's pawns. However, Reti does comment that white needs to be very careful when they are trying to create support points or stop black from attacking those support points, because black has a bishop pair, so black can attack and defend any colour square. Black can attack all of the pieces on the board, and it can defend any piece or pawn on the board. But white may be at risk of overextending. If white was to place some pawns on light squares, then it may be difficult for white to be able to defend those pawns because they only have a dark square bishop. But likewise, if white's pawns are on dark squares, they're limiting the scope of this bishop. So white moving the pawns, white has to be very careful, because they may end up just overextending the pawns and losing, or they may end up blocking in their own bishop. So because of that, the rule of thumb is with a pair of bishops, you want to try and remove the supporting outposts of the knight. And that's what we see Steinitz do. He plays c5, attacking this knight, forcing it to move away. We see knight f3, and now b6, defending this pawn, creating a nice little pawn chain here, and limiting the effectiveness of this bishop. We see knight e5, moving to another nice little outpost. Now we see queen e6, queen f3, bishop to a6, developing this bishop, noting that queen f3 attacked the rook, and bishop a6 defended the rook. We have rook f to e1, f6. So here we see Steinitz continues to try and remove outposts of this knight. So we see knight to g4. That's the only place it could have really gone. Like, I've got the moves open on the board. Here, taken, 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 taken. So knight g4 is the only move for it. And then h4, h5 even. Knight f2. And now we see queen to f7. And we see that this knight has no real good support points. If it goes to there, it'll be taken. If it goes to there, it could potentially be kicked away again. And if it goes to h3, perhaps intending to go to f4 after this pawn push, well, we can just have g5 and limit the knights again. Now here we have queen f7, and black is intending bishop b7. And with this move, black prevents knight e4, because knight e4 bishop b7 would just pin the knight to the queen, and f5 is coming next. Now we actually see f5 by white, intending to gain a little bit more space, open up the diagonal for this dark square bishop. But what white perhaps failed to realize, according to Reti, is that this pawn can just be targeted very easily. We see g5, again limiting the activity of this dark square bishop. Now we have rook a to d1, bishop to b7, attacking the queen, queen to g3, and now rook to d5. So black was threatening to take on f5. So see, rook takes, and now queen takes, and again attacking this f5 pawn. You see rook to d1, defended by the knight, and now queen takes f5, queen to e7. So white's trying to start a bit of a counter-attack, but the queen's on its own. A lone queen isn't going to be able to do much in terms of attacking, because it's just not enough. It needs the support of other pieces. But look at this bishop and the knight. The knight can't go anywhere really, and this rook, if it goes here, will also be taken. I guess it could go to h1, but that's a bit depressing. And this bishop, it can't go to here or here. Its only real options are here or here. So these two pieces are completely out of the game, meaning that white is now attacking with just the queen. Now here we see bishop to d5, moving out of the way of the queen. b3. We have rook e8 attacking the bishop, and now c4. And now here Steinitz retreats to f7. Taking on g2 may have been perhaps a better choice. So the king takes, rook takes. Okay, you could have something like this, but then queen f3 check. Queen f3 check will come in and be quite disastrous for white. So this would potentially be a little bit better because it exposes white's king and wins back the piece, and you up a pawn. Well, you up two pawns actually, because you took a pawn earlier on. But we see instead bishop f7, and now we have bishop to c1. Note that with these pawns, white has freed up this long diagonal, so white created a bit of activity for his bishop now. But we see rook e2, preventing any bishop b2 nonsense and getting this rook on the 7th rank. Rook to f1. Note that this knight was also under attack. Rook f1, defending the knight. Now queen c2. So again, we're threatening rook here, because after rook takes back, we could take with the bishop. So we see queen g3, defending this, and then queen takes a2. And this is where the game in the book ends. But it's worth noting that actually where can white really move? This bishop, wherever it goes, is limited. This knight still hasn't got that many great options. In fact, I think the computer's line is actually knight to d1. And after here, to go to knight to c3 and try and get some counterplay. But you can see how black's bishops are quite dominant. They may not be dominant at the moment, but they are able to come into the game quite easily. And black has been able to limit the dark square bishop and the knight very nicely. Now the final few moves in the game were queen to b8 check, king h7, queen back to g3, and now bishop to g6, reactivating this bishop, h4, g4, knight to d3, and now this move was a blunder that's caused white to resign, because queen takes b3, pinning the knight to the queen, and there's no real way to resolve this pin because there's two attackers of the knight. Even if White was to try and defend the queen or something like this, we could just have takes or takes. In the game, we actually saw queen c7 and then queen takes d3. And at this point, White resigns because he's a piece down and he's 2 pawns down as well. He's 3 pawns down, sorry. So yeah, this is quite easily winning for someone like Steinitz. It's quite easily winning for anyone, really. And so there we have it. That was game number 15. A game which sort of illustrates how you can try and shut off the activity of your opponent's minor pieces, and is very useful if you have the bishop pair. One of the first games, apparently, which demonstrated this method of trying to limit the opponent's activity. So I hope you liked it, and if you did, please like, comment, and subscribe if you did like it, and I hope to see you next time. We've got a few more games of Steinitz, so I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.